So with this seismic shift in sports, what's your take as a former athletic director, Ed?
Well, I think it's a very complex situation. It's going to be hard to answer in any one descriptive sentence. I think what you have here is a couple different things. One, you've got the initial historic ruling, so everybody will react to that immediately. The second part is, okay, what does it really mean? The devil's always in the detail. And the third part is, okay, now what do we do? And options are abound out there. I mean, you've got legal options, you've got philosophical, you've got emotional. So there's a lot of different categories that have to be addressed. So I think initially it's going to be something where the players, particularly Northwestern, obviously now have something that they can, stand up and say, hey, this is what we have. But they're a long way from, taking the next step. There's a lot of, there'll be a lot of legal options that'll be out there for both the NCAA and Northwestern. Recognized by the National Labor Relations Board as a huge accomplishment. But the problem now becomes, okay, who's going to sustain the number of appeals and arguments and challenges that are going to go forward?
And the goal of this whole thing really is to secure guaranteed coverage of sports-related medical expenses for current and former athletes, as well as compensation for sponsorships. Now, this really is going to affect private schools. It's not going to affect the state schools. So we might see, if this does go through, we might see a great divide between the private and the public schools and the state schools.
It possibly. I mean, I think it's going to have ramifications overall. Again, it's going to go back to what, how it's all, finally defined and what the student athlete may or may not be entitled to. Obviously the NCAA was created to, provide an education, then room, board, tuition, books, fees for those individual athletes, as well as students that excel in other music, academics, etc., to cover their expenses and provide an education and be able to give them an opportunity to showcase their talent. So if they do so are inclined or they are, selected to play at the next level in professional sports, this is their opportunity. To get down and start to define the categories, okay, what is something that we should share revenue-wise? Is it, because our name or likeness are used on a video game? Is it the marketing? Is it the sponsorship? Is it ticket sales? Is it television revenue, radio revenue, summer camp revenue, anything off of T-shirts? I mean, so there's a lot, you will open Pandora's box. It's not going to stop at a couple of different categories. So that has to really be defined, and really, do they really have those rights? I mean, as I said, I'm sure the Northwestern, NCAA, there'll be a lot of appeals to this, but is it something the courts are going to want to address? As well as, I read something this morning that this is something that could end up in, Congress or legislation, which I would hope that they'll run from something like this. They've got enough issues to deal with.
As a former AD, $16 billion a year college athletics brings into the schools. How do you decipher what money goes where? So basically, say the average student here at Iona or St. John's, how does the money affect them? Because from what I understand, the money really stays within athletics. Is that correct? Let's clarify that.
Well, I think there's a lot of different. Every institution is different. You have your whatever the university gives to subsidize the university's athletic department. There's very few schools that finish in the positive. Most colleges and universities finish in the negative, despite all of the income, from the conferences and everything else, because all the conference money is shared. So a lot of people don't really understand that. It just doesn't come right back to the school. There's a certain allotment that's given each year to a college and university from the conference. Then obviously they have their own income sources from their marketing rights, from their television, radio, etc. And this really affects the big five power conferences more than any of the others. But there's a lot of expenses. I mean, if you look at it realistically, there's two sports that really produce a lot of revenue. It's men's basketball and football. To some extent, at a lot of universities, women's basketball, and even to take it a step further, soccer does produce some revenue. But overall, it's men's basketball and football. Now, if you're a college or university, you've got 25 sports. Do those two sports with all their income offset all the other expenses, scholarship, travel, salaries. There's a lot of things that go into that. So most colleges and universities are subsidized by the universities, or they're out fundraising for for whatever they need to raise to balance out the budget. So now, if you're going to add an additional cost where student athletes are going to be taking a percentage of the income that's coming in, that again is going to open up a whole new category, and that has to all be defined. As I said, I think we're really early in those stages. So I think that everybody has to kind of look at the big picture, and I think people really have to understand that despite the Power 5 conferences and all the income that comes in, it costs a lot of money to travel, to house, feed, provide coaches, and all the other things that go along for student athletes. So it's not like, wow, all that money's coming in, it's going right back to athletics. Well, no, it has to offset the cost.
Yeah, I think when you said a lot of programs work in the red, that has to be a shock, especially with, say, the SEC and that new big contract they got with ESPN. It has to be a shock to the average person actually hearing, hey, you know what? These colleges and universities are working in the red.
Well, yeah, but again, it's a P&L statement. Anybody can. It's really, the math is not that hard or fuzzy to figure out. If you've got 30 sports or 28 sports, 2 produce revenue, 26 do not produce revenue. Yet, if your baseball team with 25 to 28 or 30 and the traveling party flies from Knoxville to to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, or somewhere else, that costs a lot of money, plus your women's softball team, plus your track and field teams, plus your swimming teams, your tennis teams, all the teams that don't produce revenue, all those expenses, they still receive full grant and aids, they still receive scholarships, room, board, food, books, fees, everything else, plus all the travel, plus salaries for coaches, and all of the other accessories. So if you start to put it on a P&L statement, it's very simple to see that there's quite a gap there.
And we're talking with Ed Manetta, the former AD at DePaul and St. John's, also current managing director for sports and entertainment at Fastlane Communications, and also sports marketing professor here at Iona College and St. John's. Ed, how would this affect, and what do you think the perception is as far as Title IX? And I would imagine there would be some kind of ebb and flow going on within colleges and universities as far as athletics, saying, hey, you could be ruining our sport.
Well, there's no question Title IX will have to be addressed to this, because whatever you provide for one set of student athletes would have to be, also, be permissible for the other set of student athletes. So for their female counterparts in a lot of sports. So again, it goes back to what is going to be defined as when they unionize, what are they entitled to? I mean, really, what are going to be the the various categories that student athletes can receive, some type of an income from. So I think it's as I said, it's a very complex question. It's not as clear and cut as it's being perceived. As I said, it has to kind of move through the various stages of, okay, now what are the definitions of this? What is going to really be allowed and permissible, and what are the ramifications, which is the key part of this whole thing. I mean, look. Is college sports a business? Yes. I think that the late Miles Brand, defined that several years ago, that college sports, because of all the intangibles and where it is today, can be defined as a business. However, because of the intent and the philosophy of the NCAA and the intent and philosophy of colleges and universities in America, we still want to maintain this amateur athletic status, and so it's a fine line, and it's a very difficult line, because the pressure's on to bring income and dollars into a university, not just because of their sports program, but it also markets the university to other non-athletes, the traditional students, because of television exposure and the increase in the popularity of the NCAA men's basketball tournament, March Madness, which is going on now, the escalation of the bowl games to a playoff system. There are students that may live on the West Coast but end up going to school in the Midwest or the East Coast, and vice versa. So again, yes, there's a lot of marketing. I would say marketing opportunities that are there that the universities have to look at. And again, that'll all be defined, as this thing moves through the process. But it's exciting, for the student athletes, but there's a lot to be defined ahead.
What's your personal take on it, Ed?
I guess there's a legal, philosophical. I'm kind of old school. My feeling is that the college university, provides an opportunity for a student athlete who has a God-given talent to showcase that talent and to have the opportunity to receive, a college education that prepares that individual for life after college. Because, as we all know, a very, very small percentage of Division One, and I don't care if it's from the Power Five conferences or any of the other schools in Division One, rarely make it to the professional ranks. So the majority of these students now have an opportunity to take the skills that they've developed academically, and when they graduate, that they'll have the opportunity to fulfill their dream in life, to succeed, with the knowledge they've learned academically. So I personally hope that we don't, to unionize, and I mean, what, again, I would have to, this has to be studied and defined as what is unionizing meaning. Is it better benefits? Well, I mean, I guess you'd have to define the benefits. Is it paying student athletes? I mean, are we really going to go down that road? Because, technically they are compensated right now through scholarships and other things. And again, the student athletes have a lot of challenges too. They put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of work. They work very hard for their college and universities. They cannot work under NCAA rules. So this may spur some type of a compromise and coming together of what, student athletes can do and can't do. And it's good for the student athletes to know the pressures that the colleges and universities are under financially as well. That while, these big numbers are thrown out there, it does take quite a bit of dollars to run a college or university and to run an athletic department. And so I think that the more knowledge they have and the more understanding they have of the mechanics of how these things work, I think it will be a way that they can start on common ground.